Just a word about that. There have been some actual studies looking at the amount of stress associated with the medical exam. And it's very interesting because in this particular study, which is reflective of others, the fear is more likely to be part of the parent's experience than the child. 97% of parents who brought their child for a medical exam were expecting a lot of were very anxious about it, whereas only about 66% of the kids felt anxious about it ahead of time. Now that's a lot of kids, it's 2/3 of the kids. After the exam, they asked these kids about the exam, and about 50% of them said they had negative things to say about it. I think, oh my God, 50%, that's pretty bad. But almost all of those were related to the blood draws, having to get the stick for the getting the blood. Not the exam so much as they didn't want to get pricked, which I totally agree with them. But the interesting thing was that it was very important how the people were prepped ahead of time. And I think this, in our own experience, this is key. Because a lot of parents, mothers will think, oh my gosh, my 5-year-old child's going to have a speculum exam. I can't stand speculum exam. I don't want my 5-year-old. So they're getting very worked up, and they're sort of communicating that to the child. So if you prep them ahead of time and say, it's not going to hurt, it's just going to be looking at the outside, you really get them to understand it, I think that can have a big impact. As well as the preparation during the exam, the behavior of the person during the exam can really help. If you explain things and are very, very slow and careful about things, the stress goes way down. We actually did a study on our kids who came through, and our child life specialist collected some quotes, and one said, I'm very glad I came because when I talk to someone, I usually forget about the things that have happened to me. Oops, looks like some of the, anyway, looks like some of the slides are gone. Okay, so we've got through the medical exam, we've got through the forensic interview, that's a little bit of stress there. What about the kids who have to go into foster care? That's going to be stressful for them. Why is that so stressful? Well, I think that especially for kids, there's that disruption of the primary relationships, especially for young children who don't have a lot of experience being away from the parent. You know, they're not in school yet, so they're not kind of dissociating themselves from the parent like a 10-year-old is used to being away. That's very hard for them, and they don't have a whole lot of life experience. They are being torn away from their siblings in some cases from their loved ones. And sometimes the visitation with the parent is the most stressful part, and they get very, very anxious about that. I think that young kids have an even bigger problem because if you think about a 3-year-old, they don't have a lot of life experience. They can't say, this is a horrible experience, but I've been through worse, and I'll get through this, and things will be okay. In a year, I'll forget about this and look back on it and say, that was hard, but it's okay. A 3-year-old doesn't have that experience, so they live in the here and now. So for them, they can't step back like a 15-year-old could do, or a 25-year-old. They don't have a good sense of time. So if you say, oh, honey, it's just for a temporary thing, it's not going to be for very long, that doesn't matter to them. To a 6-year-old, a week is a year. There's no sense of time. It's only the here and now. And so that becomes very, very difficult for them. And they have very poor language skills. A lot of maltreated kids have never learned the words to label their feelings, and so they can't express how they're feeling. They can't say, I'm sad, I'm upset. They have to act out. And so reenactment happens very frequently in foster care. This is no big news to y'all. Kids will reenact a lot of things that have worked in the past. If you think about it, if they've been in a maladaptive environment for 8 years and they've they've survived for 8 years in a terrible environment, they're going to use those skills when they come into foster care. It's the only thing they know. It's a familiar thing. It may not be fun, but it's familiar, and familiar is better than the unfamiliar. And it may give that child some sense of mastery if they can act out certain ways and even sort of induce the foster parent to take on roles that they expect. If they induce the foster parent to act like their biological parent, they're doing this unconsciously, of course not consciously, that's an expected set of events that they can control. But the foster parent may not understand what's going on. They're thinking, holy smokes, what's going on with this 11-year-old? This is not what my 11-year-old did. I have no idea how to react to this. And that can be a disaster. So you think the child comes in with abuse and neglect. He's got a very negative view of the world. The world's unsafe. People don't care about me. I can't trust anyone. People are going to hurt me, and I'm not lovable. So then they have behavior problems, as we've noticed. So all the stuff we were talking about in the beginning, all those traumatic stress behaviors. They come into foster care and they act it out. And the foster parent has no training, no idea what's going on. And so they react badly. They get sucked into acting like the biological parent because that's the way they respond. They can't see the reason why the child is acting that way. And so it's a failed foster care. And they cycle again. And by the time we see them, it's like 5 foster care placements later. So we have to ask the parents, and we have to ask ourselves, well, why are these kids doing this? The important thing is understanding the function of these conduct problems. Why do kids do things like they do? They try to reduce the danger around them. They try to engage the parent, maybe. They need love or attention. They want to shape caregiver behavior into something that they can predict. They know when their biological parent gets mad at something, at least they know that's what's going to happen. So they control events so that it happens the way they expect. And they want to maximize their self-survival. So the child, the infant who's pushing away from the parent, who is trying to coddle them and be very supportive, and the child's looking away and pushing away, that may be the child's way of getting away from something that's dangerous, minimizing their chance of getting hit upside the head, for example. The child who responds to the foster mother saying, do you want to go out and let's go get some ice cream, and what kind of dinner do you want? She's really reaching out, really trying to help. And the child just looks at her, walks into the room, shuts the door, and won't come out. Well, that's a very rejecting behavior, but that may be the child's way of minimizing things. I'm just going to get out of the way, and bad things are going to happen, are going to miss me. Or acting out may be a way of getting that parent's attention. So if you can help the foster parent understand there's a reason why the child's doing it. This is nothing personal. It's not like they don't like you. It's just that there's a reason behind it, and we need to figure it out. But the foster parent, it doesn't know that, and they're coming in with all these beliefs, and bless their hearts, just like me, I would have the same thing. The child's going to be very happy. My home is very good. I've raised 3 kids myself. I'm a really good person. The child's going to be happy and fine, and it isn't like that. The behavior will improve immediately because I know what I'm doing. I'm a good mother. And they're shocked when it doesn't work out that way. It's a recipe for disaster. The parent is reaching out to try to provide the love that this child needs, and the child's rejecting them because they don't know what the heck's going on. And that's never worked for them in the past. So how do we break that cycle and avoid these failed foster care? Well, I think we use that trauma-informed approach. And we try to say to ourselves, okay, is this child feeling safe? No, probably not. So what do we need to do to make the child feel safe? Got to ask the child, engage the child. What is it that is scary for you, and how can we make this place safe for you? Is it leaving the lights on? Is it not taking a bath, taking a shower? What is it? Assess the child's perception of the risk, and learn to reassure the child in a way that the child can believe. So you're really listening and really working out a safety plan for that child. You're trying to reduce the exposure to all those trauma triggers, and that takes some figuring out. You're not going to know that the aftershave is going to cause that trigger, but after a while, the foster parent may figure that out. And they can tell other people, by the way, they don't like loud noises or something. Don't try to give this child a bath, give them a shower, something so you're avoiding these triggers for stressful memories. Establishing some control for the child. And these are small things. Do you want to eat macaroni and cheese or rice? Do you want to sleep with the light on or off? Those little things that can give the child a sense of control and a sense of mastery, that they are able to influence their environment. Has a tremendous effect on their self-esteem. Establishing routine, et cetera. So you know these things. These are sort of obvious, but they're not necessarily obvious to a foster parent who may be really sort of taking that for granted. They never stopped and thought about how important that is. I think another thing is, it's really important to get a trauma assessment. Oh, I was told not to do that. I have to go over here. It's really important to get a trauma screen and trauma assessment of the child to figure out what kind of trauma they've had and what their trauma symptoms are. That screen can be done by you or me, but the trauma assessment is much more in depth and is something that's done by a mental health provider. And that's really, really important to do, but not only just for the child, but for the parent as well. Because parents often have their own trauma histories. How many times have we worked with parents who have you're nodding your head, who have had a child who's been sexually abused, and you find out their mother's been sexually abused? That's almost a given. We see that so often. And so they've got their own trauma to work through, and they may never have gotten any counseling for that. Some kids have been badly abused, grow up, and they're foster parents, so they've got their own abuse histories to worry about. So it's worth thinking about that. We need to build the resilience of the child, and if they are involved in any community activities, go with that and encourage that. Encourage a strong relationship with at least one adult, a foster parent or somebody else makes all the difference. Work if they have strong religious beliefs, in helping them explore those. You just kind of take what's strong and build it. Encourage family support, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've covered that. And then, let's see. I think we've covered that as well. So we need to teach the parents, and I think this is critically important, that parents, foster parents, can't be expected to know how to raise kids who have a lot of behavior problems, because these are not your, quote, blank slate kids who've had an easy upbringing. These kids have a lot of problems, and foster parents need to be trained. So they need to develop sensitivity to the cues. What are the trauma triggers? What is this child trying to do? And what are they trying to tell me through their behaviors? Step back, say it's not a personal thing. He doesn't hate me. He's just acting out for what reason? What is it that he's gaining from this, or hoping to gain, subconsciously? We need to teach them about social learning approaches, things like timeouts and behavior modification approaches and social contracts, things like that. And then teach them about reasonable expectations for change. How many foster parents think, okay, if I just give them a little love and they'll be fine, and this child who's been terribly traumatized is not going to be fine. And we can't expect a child who runs away chronically for the last 5 years to immediately stop running away when they go to this foster family. Our goal may be that they run away a few less times, or they don't stay away as long. Maybe they have a tantrum that doesn't last as long. Something that's realistic, and so that the parent can feel like they're having an effect, a positive effect, and they don't feel so defeated because they have better expectations. Okay, I've been talking loud and fast. Child abuse and neglect has profound effects on its victims, and it influences brain development, especially with this toxic stress, and really has pervasive impact on the child's emotional well-being and their physical and social development. We need to avoid adding to the problem through our interventions and by using a trauma-informed care approach, knowing that what we do may have an impact, and figuring out ways that we can minimize the trauma that we're causing. I think there are a lot of effective ways that we can help a child, and foster care training, foster care parent training, I think is one of them. We're actually doing some foster parent training through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and with help from a MERA group, doing some training of foster parents that really gets into this whole idea of providing trauma-informed care and reinterpreting context problems. And what do you do when a child does this? How do you respond? Why should you have these different expectations? Love is not all this child needs. Those kinds of things that seem very basic but are really helpful for parents. And there's my contact information. I hope that I've been given a lot of information, but I hope you'll feel free to call me or email. I love to talk about these things, and I learn so much when people have questions or bring anecdotes. So please help me.